Hey, what's up everybody? Hope everything is well with all of you. Today I'm going to be talking about Shadestep and some of its more practical utilization. So there are a lot of different tricks and uses with Shadestep, but I'm just going to be going over some of the ones that I find to be the most useful. I will admit I'm not the best Night Stalker in the game, but it is a class that I play the most of, and I have developed a pretty solid understanding of how Shadestep works. What I will be sharing with you today might not be a new revelation to you, but I am hoping some of you might learn something from this and be able to apply it to your own game. Pretty much all of these applications of Shadestep can be used on a game-to-game basis. Alright, so without further ado, let's get into it. The first thing I'll need to address is making sure that you fully understand how Shadestep works. So what I mean by this is that you can confidently Shadestep in any direction and turn corners with Shadestep. So essentially the fundamentals of Shadestep movement without becoming confused or lost in your positioning. So I recommend that you practice this in Patrol if you're unfamiliar with the movements, and then apply them into Crucible once you feel comfortable. Next, you need to be making sure you're using the most optimal button layout. You'll see here in the settings that all of the layouts except for Puppeteer have circle or B for crouch. If you're a claw player, perhaps running one of these layouts is ideal for you, but that really depends on what you find to be the most comfortable. I play claw, and I used to play green thumb back in Halo, so that's actually what I started with in Destiny, and I played with it up until just a couple of months ago when I switched to Puppeteer. Basically, claw is really stressful on your joints, and it's honestly just much easier to be able to Shadestep using the right thumbstick. So whether you play claw or not, I strongly recommend changing to Puppeteer. It'll be weird getting used to it at first, but being able to look around and Shadestep at the same time is extremely valuable because you don't have to move your thumb from the thumbstick to circle or B. Shadestep's just right there under your thumb. Also, if you're a Scuff or Elite controller user, binding Shadestep to one of the paddles is also going to be ideal, so that you can basically never have to move your thumb from the right stick, and also because having the only function for your thumbs being looking and moving makes for much smoother movement and aim. In my opinion, the motor control aspect of Shadestep is going to be equally as important as the actual application of it. Okay, so now you're comfortable using Shadestep and you have established what button layout you should use. If you have to make changes, just realize that, it might take you up to a week to fully get comfortable using the different layout. You might find yourself playing worse at first, but trust me, just stick with it. In the long run, it'll be so much better for you. So let's talk about how valuable Shadestep truly is. The first thing and most obvious function for Shadestep is avoiding grenades. So this is something that you'll have to practice and perhaps even remind yourself to do, but once you get the hang of it, you'll be able to Shadestep your grenades just by recognizing the sound of them. So in order to Shadestep the Firebolt or Arcbolt grenades, you want to Shadestep pretty much right when it hits the ground. Basically what happens when the grenade touches the ground is it starts searching for targets, and when you Shadestep, it confuses the tracking on it, and ultimately that leads to you just not taking any damage. Arcbolts seem to be a little bit more forgiving than Firebolts because to me they seem like they take a little bit longer to track. However, it should be noted that if it does chain to a teammate, you're going to want to time your Shadestep appropriately so that it doesn't chain to you after it chains to your teammate. For Accident Bolts, you can Shadestep at any time during the chase or when the grenade hits the ground. For Skip and Swarm grenades, you can Shadestep at any time. Skip grenades will typically track you a lot harder and longer than Swarm grenades, and you usually only need to Shadestep once for them, but sometimes you need to Shadestep twice just because of how aggressive the tracking is. Also, if you drop the tracking from Skip grenades, I find that sometimes if you get close to the fragments, they might be able to track you again. Shadestep is also useful for avoiding the blast radius of Trip Mine, Flashbang, Suppression, and even Incendiary grenades. The next tactics I'll be discussing are the different types of movements and repositioning with Shadestep. So similar to Panic Melee in Call of Duty and Panic Supers in Destiny, Shadestep can also be used in the same panicking manner. Shadestep can be used as a quick fix if you make an error, because it is very forgiving. If you make an error or miscalculation, you can usually just Shadestep back into a room or back behind cover. The only time Shadestep will not be forgiving in this situation is if you make an error using your Shadestep, and I'll get into that towards the end of the video. The first movement tactic I'm going to be discussing with you is sliding. So sliding is a tactic that almost every top tier player uses in Destiny. It's an invaluable tactic as it allows you to catch another player off guard. It keeps you off the radar, and when you're crouched you have increased accuracy. So sliding, as most people know at this point, is a staple for gap closing when using a shotgun. Similar to sliding, Shadestep can also close gaps. And then obviously if you Shadestep after you slide, you'll close an even larger gap. This is most useful when utilized defensively. So for example, if you're running to get behind cover and you're being shot at, sliding and shade-stepping towards, say, a door or to cover would be the ideal movement here. Essentially, you're sliding to throw off their aim, and basically you'll end up ducking under their reticle, so to speak, and then you shade-step to gain that extra bit of distance that you'd otherwise just have to run if you weren't using shade-step. So another example would be if you're engaging using the sliding method, and you end up being caught out in the line of a sniper, sort of just like this, you can actually just shade-step back behind cover. Again, this can be applied if the enemy throws a grenade, or if another enemy appears to help team shot against you. Another type of movement you can apply Shadestep to, for instance, would be to gain vision. So you would do this by peeking around a corner or down a hallway. So you use the method of sliding to engage. You can slide past a corner to check a position in a room, or even just see where a player is down a hallway or down a sniper lane, and then quickly Shadestep back to where you initially came from. Another way of doing this, and perhaps a more safe method, is to just Shadestep across the doorway, or across the hallway, or even just from cover to cover, while checking the area in question. Now this movement doesn't have to be done with the intent of checking to see if an enemy is there. It's actually always smart to just slide and Shadestep to maneuver the map at all times. More importantly, use it anytime you could be exposed to an enemy. You can usually gauge this based on radar and your teammates' positions, but there is the chance that somebody is sniping and has a really good angle on you and you can't see them on your radar. So I've outlined all of these different movements with Shadestep, but arguably the most practical and most common use for Shadestep is repositioning in gunfights. So you'll notice that a lot of Night Stalkers will typically just Shadestep if they're losing a gunfight. That's because it's a quick and effective escape tool if you use it properly. So there are a number of different scenarios where you would use Shadestep in a gunfight, and the one that I find myself getting into the most frequently is when I'm going to engage into a battle and the player has already or is about to throw a grenade at me. Your first priority should be to Shadestep the grenade, regardless of what one it is. If it hits you, you're going to take a substantial amount of damage, and more than likely you'll lose the gunfight. Essentially, if you Shadestep the grenade first, you avoid any damage taken from that, and you can work on your gun skill alone to outplay the opponent. The only time I would prioritize shooting the enemy instead of Shadestepping is if you're committing to a shotgun kill, or if the enemy is already really low on health. This leads me to my next point, shotgunning in Shadestep. If you slide in for a shotgun kill and both you and the enemy happen to miss, Shadestepping to get another angle on the player is going to be an advantage for you. This is of course reliant on the fact that you know where Shadestep is going to take you when you use it, which leads back to the beginning of this video, understanding how Shadestep works. The same principle can be applied to a player using a sniper rifle. If you miss a shot against another player who is also aimed at you, it would be wise to Shadestep away so you're no longer in that player's scope. Alternatively, you can Shadestep to try and gain a second angle on the player. It is important to note that if you miss your shot, it is always a good idea to pull out your primary if the range is appropriate. You wouldn't want to pull out a Mida against a shotgun if you're in close range, and you wouldn't want to pull out a last word against a sniper rifle at long range. It is also advised that if you miss one or more shots, that you just disengage completely and try to regroup with your team, or gain another angle entirely. If you choose to continue in the gunfight, honestly I'd recommend just securing the kill with a super if you miss 2 or more shots, if the circumstances permit you to do so. Meaning, if you have to use your Nova Bomb, it's not going to shaft you because the other team still has an offensive super like Sunsinger or Blade Dance, or using your super is going to secure your round in Trials, for example. But I digress. Finally, the most used repositioning tactic is a one-on-one gunfight, where you are losing, or the enemy gets a drop on you. You would Shadestep to avoid their shots, or to throw off their aim, so you can attempt to catch them off guard, or have them mess up. Typically, if you can, you don't want to Shadestep into the wide open. You should always be trying to Shadestep to cover or out of the line of sight of the other player shooting at you. If you end up Shadestepping just to the side or backwards or forwards, you'll be vulnerable as Shadestep is not very difficult to predict. Now, I will likely receive a lot of flack for this just because it is an ongoing issue, especially if you were to do it in, say, 3v3 scrims or a tournament. Just know that I definitely do not condone the abuse of it. And what I'm referring to is the Shadestep glitch, where you appear to still be in Shadestep, but you're actually at weapons ready. I'm not going to be sharing with you how to do that, but it has been used in the past, and I've used it in the past where I'm panicking or I misuse my Shadestep. I recommend not using this, as you will probably end up getting some hate mail, and it's not exactly a good habit to get into. However, if you do use it, it is not a bannable offense. Alright, and so finally, I would just like to touch base briefly on a few other quick applications for Shadestep. So if you didn't already know, Shadestep also removes the tracking that is granted to other Night Stalkers that are using the perk Keen Scout. Basically, you'll see above your super bar a text that reads hunted, and by shadestepping you will no longer be hunted by the enemy Night Stalker. Similar to the removal of tracking from grenades, Shadestep also drops the tracking from rockets and supers. Typically, you have to be quick when shadestepping rockets, as once they are headed in your direction, unless there is no structure surrounding you, the blast radius might just end up killing you anyway. And for the last quick trick I have for you today, as I know a lot of you guys probably suffer from this out there, is potentially avoiding a revive snipe. I know we've all been there where you have a teammate that revives you in trials, and you can just see 2 or 3 of their guys aimed right at your head ready to pick you off right away because your teammate either couldn't push you or didn't know to push you. Your last ditch effort here is really just to spam your crouch button in hopes that you can shadestep out of the way before you get sniped again. Alright, so let's do a quick recap. Shadestep is a very strong mobility tool because it can be effectively used in and outside of close quarters combat. It is more effectively used as a defensive tool rather than an offensive tool because it is easily predicted if the player has vision of you prior to the shadestep. While the actual application of shadestep is ultimately going to be what saves your ass in game, the physical, mechanical application is equally important. Find a button layout that works for you and test it for a couple of days. You know it's going to feel strange to you, but it's better in the long run. I recommend Puppeteer. The next most important point to make note of is actually understanding how Shadestep works. Where is it going to take you? How long is the animation? How far does the animation take you? Educate yourself on Shadestep. Don't expect to be a pro with it if you find yourself lost after using it just a couple of times. You might end up finding that switching button layouts is ideal for you well after you've gotten used to how it works. Whichever step comes first does not matter, so long as you're comfortable with both the button layout and you're comfortable with the actual usage of Shadestep. Shadestep stops the tracking on all grenades, rockets, supers, and even Keen Scout from other Night Stalkers. You can close gaps to get away from enemies, or you can get closer to them. You can close even larger gaps by sliding first and then applying Shadestep. Shadestep will help you get out of sticky situations if you make an error in judgment. You can use Shadestep to reposition in gunfights, gain vision of enemies by quickly using Shadestep to get out of their line of sight, as well as evading conflict completely by confusing your enemies. So that's all I have for you guys today on Shadestep. I know the video is extremely long, but I really hope it was informative and that it teaches you guys something that you may not have known about Shadestep. I just want to thank you so much for watching, and if you guys enjoyed the video or you found it helpful in any way, I'd really appreciate it if you gave it a thumbs up, as it lets me know that you are enjoying my content and it encourages me to make more videos like this. Anyway, thank you again, take it easy, and I'll catch all of you guys next time.